Damn.
You are really chronically online for somebody so busy.
Chronically online.
Wow, thirsty.
The
That's still like
laptop
a lot of
signal.
people. Cold. Yeah, 3 is like normal. 3 is a lot. Yeah.
This is gonna be pretty relaxing.
I'm about to say some crazy shit.
Bring the beer. Bring the six pack.
Yeah, we
Oh
should.
my god.
We
Is
should've
anybody
got-
in this room a former anarchist?
We should get Capri Suns.
Dude,
Hi.
it's my favorite. I mean, sorry to y'all. I have no favorites, but it's Ashton.
That's fair. Yeah.
And he gives me this snub.
God, don't do this.
Virginia voters approved a House map that could let Democrats flip up to 4 House seats, a midterm boost for the party. It's relevant.
And 3. 605, yeah.
People fear the center.
I know.
Is that Dan Sobey?
Hmm?
Is that Dan Sobey?
I can't tell. Is that racist?
Be careful.
Please do.
Drop my shit off this table. The audio catches us.
I'm not saying.
No more whispering.
Is it saying it up there? Sandwiches.
I gotta be careful.
Yeah, you do. Because it says it up there, even if it doesn't say it down here. It's good. I want Ashton in the middle so I can look at him.
Yeah. And young Cash Cross. Not as young as he used to be, though.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Blaise Malczewski. I am the ASUO Director of Organizing this year. I'm happy to introduce the first Socialist Speakers Series spin-off this year. I'd like to start this off with a quote from a Polish German revolutionary, Rosa Luxemburg, who is kind of attributed, it's kind of messy, to saying, quote, bourgeois society stands at a crossroads, either transition to socialism or regression into barbarism. This question of socialism or barbarism or socialism has, I think, never been more relevant to the moment that we find ourselves in right now, where we're seeing a direct regression back into authoritarianism, fascism. We find ourselves in a pretty bleak moment in history right now. The forces of the capitalist class are being actively embraced by fascism wholeheartedly. The humanistic illusion of liberalism and neoliberalism that has existed for the last 50, 60 years has been utterly abandoned. Former justifications for war, for democratizing other nations, for liberating the people, like in Iraq and Libya, have been entirely forgotten. Trump instead simply declares that he intends to wipe a civilization off the map in the case of Iran. This fascism has been brought home. Far-right militias of the 20th century have now been integrated into the state. roaming and terrorizing our communities unabated as ICE agents. The center simply cannot hold. Milquetoast Democrats and other ineffective solutions to these problems. They can't seem to understand that genocide is simply an unpopular policy. They think that ICE officers just need body cameras. They think just to send one more strongly worded letter to Trump will make this nightmare stop. Yet we've seen glimmers of hope emerge. We've seen actual movement. When Renee Good was murdered by ICE, when ICE was occupying Minnesota, the city came out in support, declaring a quasi-general strike for the day. Communities have come out in droves for their neighbors, to support their fellow people. People are tired of being unable to afford basic costs of living, dealing with living under the boot. In Eugene and on campus, we see the first-hand impacts of the federal regime. Whether it be ICE and DHS, the federal building attacking protesters, the university administration deploying riot police on student worker protesters, strikers, or we've seen how firsthand to fight against it, like in the case of the encampment, like in the strike, or with the anti-ICE organizing happening on campus right now. The movement is actually growing. It's growing stronger. It's tangible. And we're winning tangible demands on top of that. Yet, this movement on campus is seen across the country. What we're doing here is felt and seen by everyone, everywhere, and they're doing it as well. Union and community organizing is strengthening. Public opinion against Israel is at an all-time low. Appetite for milquetoast Democrats is at its end. And some are ready to reject the Democrats entirely. People want so much more from their bosses and from their government. The victory of Zoran Mamdani highlights this. But Zoran's victory emerged as an organization. And this organizing environment is seen in other places across the country as well. In the case of NYCDSA and other DSA chapters across the country, DSA has been operating at many different levels in many different communities, building principled organizers who seek to work for the betterment of people and not just bosses. To return to the quote I mentioned at the start, it's pretty clear that we're staring down the barrel of a nuclear or climate-caused apocalypse. Staring down the barrel of barbarism, we have a chance now to change this, build something new, something that works for everyone. We have an opportunity to build socialism. And now to pivot, this event is held in conjunction with the Roar Center, the Radical Organizing Activism Resource Center. We work on campus to better our community, to better the world, and to give resources where they're needed. I myself am a Roar co-director, and I'm really excited for this panel today and to highlight the great work that some UO alum, some DSA organizers, some electeds, some really great people have been doing, and how we're actually going to push forward and build something new, greater, and better. Thanks, guys. And now I'm going to introduce ASUO President Priscilla Moreno.
Hi, everybody. My name is Priscilla Moreno. I use she, her pronouns, and I have the great privilege and honor of serving as the student body president here at UO. And before we get started, I want to thank Roar and our panelists and all of you here today for joining us for our first Socialist Speaker Series event. This is something that we have been talking about since we first took office, and even before then when we were running our campaign. We ran on a platform called UO Student Power, which has been running organizers, activists, and allies in ASUO elections for the past 4 years now. And it exists because there's a lot of power in student government, both financially and also in terms of our influence on the university, the city, and the state. And unfortunately, in recent history, ASUO has not utilized that power to build broader student power across campus, and it has even been in direct opposition to the student movement. So that's why we're doing this series, that's why we're here today, hoping to learn how to build power, hear directly from socialist organizers who are working to build a better world. So thank you so much for being here, and we're going to kick it off with our panelists' introductions, hearing a little bit about who they are and what they do. This can help guide your questions when we get into our live Q&A portion if you have a specific question for a specific panelist. So we'll get started with David.
Yeah, thank you so much, Priscilla and Blaze. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I can just introduce myself briefly and maybe offer some introductory remarks to get the discussion going. So yeah, my name is David. I recently graduated from University of Oregon. I just got my PhD in sociology. After a long time, I've been here. I started here in 2017, actually, and was involved in the GTFF. I see some GTFFers here today. I was a steward for a couple years, and then in the early 2020s, during the pandemic, actually, I pivoted my focus to supporting DSA and building YDSA here on campus. We can get into some of more of that history, but UO YDSA, I'm proud to say, has been really at the center of a lot of the organizing over the last couple of years, including the undergrad student worker drive, USW. It was involved heavily in the Palestine solidarity movements, and more recently has been involved in ASUO and building a powerful fighting student government. So I'm very proud to have played some part in all of that. So just to set the stage a little bit, we are, as Blaise just introduced, staring down a pretty frightening set of circumstances, nationally, internationally, thinking about militarism, genocide, climate change, all of these overlapping catastrophes and crises. This is an era defined by crisis in so many ways. But it's also remarkably an era in which there are new openings on the left. Over the last 10 years, we have seen a really remarkable movement to build a left-wing alternative to both mainstream liberalism and to, I think, an older tradition of progressivism that was, I think, not up to the task of beating back the right and actually realigning the working class behind a pro-democratic politics. But starting really in 2015, I think is when we can date this change. Bernie Sanders ran for president, and that campaign was really decisive. It did a couple different things. It introduced the language of democratic socialism into American political culture, where it had been effectively banished for generations. Socialism was a deep taboo in American politics going back many decades to the Cold War. Bernie did so much to destigmatize that. And then also, Bernie presented the idea of challenging the Democratic Party establishment within the party structures itself, so through the primary process. So a lot of the left-wing alternatives that have been put forward for decades before had sought to do these kind of quixotic, unlikely to succeed third-party efforts. The Green Party is just one, but there have been many through history. And due to the structure of American politics, that was, I think, destined to fail. But Bernie, by challenging in the primaries, actually put forward a real challenge that the Democrats had to take seriously, and the mainstream media and the corporate class had to take seriously. And that was the conjuncture in which so many young people, millennials, disillusioned by the great financial crisis and the fallout and the loss of opportunities and this long economic stagnation, they saw a real alternative, a fighting alternative, represented by Bernie, and they threw themselves into that movement. And they were deeply radicalized against the political establishment through that campaign. I was one of those people. I started out as a climate activist in undergrad. At the time, I was living in Chicago, but I was deeply moved by the Bernie campaign, and I joined DSA right after that, actually. And a lot of people followed that same trajectory. So basically, people gravitated towards DSA because it's an organization that was associated with Bernie Sanders and offered a kind of container in which to build and develop this new politics and a new strategy. And that is what we've been working to build for years now. And it has many different dimensions. It's active in different zones of American life, different institutions, including the student movement here, but also the labor movement, as we're going to hear, and electoral struggles to elect people to office. All of these have been parts of this project. And there are many, many unanswered questions and things we don't know how to deal with, like what do we do when we actually win power? That's something that we're working through right now with Soron. But I think for the first time now, it's 2026, 10 years after that first insurgency, we are really in a position to advance and grow our movement explosively. It's still a very dangerous situation. We might lose. You can always lose in politics, of course, even if you're prepared and you have the right strategy. But we have a real chance now. I think that's how I would like to start off this discussion.
that's really great to hear from you. That gives me hope.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Ella Malloy. I use she, her pronouns. I am really honored to be here and especially excited, and it's kind of crazy to see a collaboration between ROAR and ASUO. They were at odds almost the entire time that I was an undergrad. So that's really great. I'm a socialist because I was once a worker at U of O, and I'm a student worker here, and I had such great mentors here from YDSA that most of my college experience, I didn't call myself a socialist. I think I considered myself a leftist, but because of YDSA and because of the socialist organizers I had around me and my experience labor organizing is why I'm a socialist today. So I am going to talk probably mostly about the labor movement. That's kind of where I am on my day-to-day, but I am really excited to hear about all the different facets that we have to deal with as socialists. I think that I was able to experience a specific flavor of unionism that a lot of people do not experience the first time they're in a union, especially in like low-wage jobs, like in the grocery industry, especially here in Oregon. And because I had this education around class struggle unionism from my coworkers, from the organizers alongside me, that really helped me develop a solid sense of how the labor movement can contribute to building a better world. And I really think that has contributed to being a lifelong organizer, and I plan to be a lifelong socialist organizer. And I think when we get unions right now that don't win. They cozy up to bosses. They waste dues money. They're disconnected from social movements, from the community, from the people around them. And those types of unions are barely better than any union at all, or not having a union. And it really points to how we need all of these facets of organizing together. We need to organize, large groups of workers in places where we can make sure that they win, that their living standards are better, and that they're connected to the community. But we can't just do that. We need to connect our labor movement to our social movements and connect to getting candidates elected that can lead with socialist, progressive politics. But we also need to hold those candidates accountable when they do get elected. We need to make sure they fully fund our schools. We need to make sure they follow through on healthcare for all of us. We need to make sure that we work towards things like social housing. So we need a party of working people that can, keep our electeds accountable. And part of that is making sure we have a really militant and organized labor movement. I think I'll end there. I don't want to speak too much off the cuff, and that's where my notes end. So I'll pass it to Noah.
Yeah, hi y'all, I'm Noah Thompson. I use he, they pronouns. I am filling in for Laura Wadlin, who is originally on this panel. Laura is one of many labor mentors of mine and is a really fantastic leader. I'm sorry that y'all can't hear from her tonight, but she was sick, so they brought me in as backup. To speak a little bit to why Laura is so good before getting into my own stuff, Laura is a rank and file educator at Portland Community College. And just recently was the leader in the first wall-to-wall community college strike in the history of the United States. That was really successful. There's a lot of lessons to be drawn from that campaign about leadership from workers on the shop floor, opposition to union staff and the labor bureaucracy, suppressing worker militancy and telling people to settle for less, and directly combating important institutions, not as powerful as the University of Oregon, but publicly funded higher education institutions in our state, which is something that directly affects everybody in here's day to day. So big celebration to that, and I'll try to pull in whatever relevant threads from her I can in my responses. That being said, I'm somebody else. I'm Noah. I am here, I guess, primarily for the work that I've done on the University of Oregon campus over the past couple years. I was a refounding member of the University of Oregon Young Democratic Socialists of America, who are a really small group during COVID, and then once we moved to in-person, that chapter built up and is hopefully doing good work still here. Also, as part of that work, I was a founding member alongside a couple other folks in this room of the University of Oregon Student Workers Campaign. So, and there's a lot of reasons that we as young socialists decided to organize labor. It wasn't something that was just off the cuff. Some of us already had jobs on campus. Some of us got jobs on campus with the explicit intent of unionizing student workers because we had done an analysis of the university, of the sorts of changes that we wanted to see as students, democratization, free higher education, things that really require having a base of power on campus and directly opposing the centralized administrative power that does exist on campus in the Board of Trustees and various administrators, which hasn't happened yet. That's a really, really long-term project. We knew that it's not just something that you can demand and call for, so we wanted to build power. And as socialists, we know that labor and working people, that's the real core of power, and it's what keeps society running. That's a lesson that hopefully people have already learned, but if not, really drill it into your head that labor is the hope of the world, if there is any. So we led that campaign. It was a really long campaign, from independently signing cards and connecting with workers and fighting over issues, all the way through bargaining and striking last year. Unfortunately, dropped out before I could see any of that stuff, but really happy to see everybody that did participate in that. Since then, I do labor organizing with SEIU, which is one of the larger unions in the country. I represent state employees, and even more of that kind of fight for better public life and against capitalism and centralization, austerity. That's something that comes up day to day, and then do other socialist organizing in Portland. Again, I'm speaking a little bit more off the cuff, but when it comes to really tackling our times, I hope people in this room know that capitalism is the villain here, that having a world that is run on the profit motive and on extracting profit at the expense of working people is really the source of so many issues, whether we're talking about imperialism, genocide, we're talking about climate issues, or we're just talking about day-to-day material conditions. We live in the richest country in the world, and I'm sure many people here don't feel that. I've been homeless myself, dropped out of school for money issues. I don't know who in here has prospects of homeownership, but I wish you the best. All these sorts of things are things that we've been conditioned to have really low expectations on because of capitalist society. So I think that the real bigger question is, how can we build a movement to defeat that? And to me, that's what socialism is. So hopefully that'll come to light more in the kind of follow-up question phase. I don't want to go on too much longer right now, but really tackling organizing is a serious issue, making sure that the things that we are spending our lives on, whether that's work and making sure that when we as workers are engaging with each other, are fighting to raise expectations, to combat austerity, and to build power, and hopefully transform society, or whether that's what we do with our other time and saying, hey, I'm going to commit my time doing things that are probably less fun, going to meetings, talking to people who annoy me greatly, all with the goal of building a movement that can transform society. That is what I'm in this shit for, and hopefully others are. And it's a really serious task. It's not something to take for granted. So hopefully we can all share lessons from that with each other and encourage each other to do this forever, even outside of school. Yeah.
Hi, I am Kai Fireside. I started at UO in spring of 2020, which was a great time to start a university experience. I got to go to introduction, and that was the only time I was on campus. I was working at Starbucks, and I fought really hard to unionize the first Starbucks in the state of Oregon. And after we won our vote unanimously, I left and got a job in the field of my study, which is archaeology. So that's what I do for work now. But I also like to stick my nose into all the community business. So last summer when the police started putting up flock cameras everywhere, we organized a group to fight against that, and we successfully got Eugene, Springfield, and Lane County to cancel their flock contracts. And that led me into this realization that all of the crises that we are in are legislative crises. All of the problems that we're having are because legislators are making terrible, terrible decisions that don't have our best interests at heart. And if the problems are legislative, then the solutions must be legislative also. But the only path to get there is to go and fight it from the inside. So the way that I see it, the solution is electoral. And I know that some people don't want to fight it from the inside, and that's sort of a gross idea, but I really think that that's our best option right now. And apparently some other people think that too, as we've seen with Zoran. And, you know, Oregon is actually really close to having a socialist caucus in the legislature, so we're not alone there. I kind of want to get this moving to Q&A, and I feel like I say the same thing every time there's a mic in my hand. So, Starbucks, flock. I'm running for state legislature now. Next.
Okay, let's see.
Great, we have 2 prepared questions, and then we'll move to live Q&A. Blake's going to ask that first one.
Gotcha. For the first question, we have, how do you think socialism could become a real established party in our system? And what are the avenues that you see this happening in?
Yeah, so this is a famously difficult question in the United States specifically. So you might be familiar with this idea of American exceptionalism, United States is a shining city on a hill, yada yada. It's mostly untrue, it's mostly mythology. But one really important way in which the United States is actually exceptional in a negative way is that the US did not ever generate a working class based political party like so many, pretty much every other country in the world generated at least one, sometimes many, labor-based, or what we call social democratic parties, socialist parties of one strand of socialism or another, sometimes revolutionary, sometimes more reformist, others more rooted, primarily in labor unions, others more institutional. But across the board, in every country except the United States, pretty much, you had mass political parties that sought to advance the interests of working class people through public office and by passing laws that would benefit, the masses of ordinary people. Labor laws, universal health care, better public services, decommodifying parts of life, taking parts of life out of the market and endowing those as rights. So treating housing, instead of housing being a commodity, like it is in our system, where it's something it's a privilege that you can either buy or not get and then live on the street. In many other societies, housing is treated as a kind of right. There are still, inequalities in that system, but there's a baseline, protection that working people have. We have some of that too in the United States, but our welfare state, the set of rights that we have just by virtue of being human beings in this world, generally it's a lot weaker, it's a lot more thin than in other countries. And the main reason for that, it's not American culture, it's not individualism, it's because we didn't generate a political weapon for working people. Not one that ever took power. I shouldn't say that we never generated one. There were working class parties and many working class movements, and movements composed mostly of working people that did change this country for the better. Many, many movements, from abolitionism to the labor movement of the 1930s, the civil rights movement. All of these movements and many others were driven forward mostly by working people, but we never formed a party that could stably advance our interests in between those periods of mass mobilization, which come and go. It can't always be spring 2024. It can't always be summer 2020. Most of the time, people are not out in the streets, are not out on strike and mobilizing. We need stable organizational vehicles that can coordinate action in between those periods. And in most of the world, that takes the form of a political party. So the question is, how do you actually get it? In the United States, there's a bunch of reasons why we don't have one. The institutions of elections in this country make forming a new party very difficult. There's a very strong two-party bias in most parts of our political system. And because workers they won the right to vote before, basically before capitalism, the Industrial Revolution occurred, they didn't have to fight their way in. So they didn't form a single party. Instead, workers ended up in both of the major parties. So that's kind of the context. DSA's rough strategy is basically what Bernie Sanders tried to do in 2016 and in 2020. You run within the Democratic Party primary, and you try to run against the party's establishment. You basically declare war on the party from within, so where they can't actually ignore you. You have to be in the primary to be taken seriously, to get a mass audience of working people to be able to hear your message. And then in between those elections, you have to be present in the community. You have to be present in social movements, fighting like around the flock cameras, for example, or fighting to build a labor movement. DSA's strategy is not just to wait between elections and just orient to those. It's rather to be present in all of the struggles of working people and oppressed people in between, every single week, every single day, so that when those elections do come around, you actually have the credibility. That's what Zoran was doing in all of those years before he won, before he was elected to the assembly in 2020, and while he was an assemblyman. He was out there every single day. It's not just during the campaign. So that's one basic part of our strategy. Then we can get into more about how a break could actually occur with the Democrats, but the basic principles are you seek to represent and fight with the working class every single day on a continuous basis, and you build up a kind of organic basis within civil society. There's no other way to do this. There's no other way to win a deep majority that can transform capitalist society, not just win a few elections here or there.
I don't think I'll be able to answer this fully, not that that's what you're asking, but I think I would start that we need to win some more elections. That has to be part of our first step. I went to my first canvass for a political candidate, and I just did the math, and it had been 8 years since I'd canvassed for someone. I felt so hopeless with electoral politics for a long time, and we have someone running in the Portland metro area. I'm in Portland. We have someone running openly as a Democratic Socialist named Dr. Tammy Carpenter, who hopefully will belong in the Socialist caucus here. I think there'll be maybe 4 or 5 of them. It was amazing to see everyone come out for this campaign and knock doors. That's all we were doing, was talking to voters. And I was talking with my former coworker about what other campaigns are doing in the state. And, DSA is really one of the only organizations that turns people out to canvass in mass. Unions don't really do it anymore. And so we need to get out there and get people elected. And part of that comes with steering people away from that hopelessness that I think the kind of dominant political left here in the US makes it seem like, well, why do we even try? Everything is crumbling, let's just blow it all up. We hear a lot of that, especially in the Pacific Northwest. And I think people really get pulled into that. And so we do need to run candidates that win and follow through on their promises and get people believing that this is actually a real strategy. And part of that just comes with fulfilling things like we have free preschool, or we're attempting to have free preschool in Portland, which actually makes it easier for people to live in Portland. And it doesn't sound necessarily like a socialist policy, right? But it's really important that people can stay in the city that they grew up in and continue to raise their family. I think part of that also comes with driving the labor movement back to helping out with getting people elected, right? I don't want to say it like that, but we need to turn out our coworkers, and we need to use our labor unions in a way that we are actually not only just helping not winning good contracts, but also helping make sure that we have reforms in the state. That's it.
Yeah. I'm going to start by being pedantic and minorly critiquing the question, which is to say, like, socialism is a bigger picture horizon than building a socialist party, right? We want to have organization that can actually advocate for working people and for a better world and for against all of the bad stuff that we know is going on. But that a socialist party is kind of a precursor to that. We want formal organization that we can use to combat the explicitly capitalist Democratic Party, and of course the Republican Party, who's probably the most evil organization on the planet. But even that horizon, which is still a monumental task for us, is not what we are fighting for long term. We are fighting for a world that is free from the profit motive dominating the most important aspects of our life. That being said, there's a lot that we can do as individuals to push towards that sort of rupture. I want to take a little bit more of a skeptical approach towards electoralism than the panelists have spoken on so far, and say that I don't think that electoralism is necessarily the path towards rupture from capitalism, but to not replicate the mistake that the left has made over the past 60 plus years of our lifetime, we do need to recognize that it is where power lies. It is where political consciousness lies in the United States, and therefore we can't abstain from that. We need to engage in electoral politics in some fashion to contest power, to try to win reforms for working people. We're seeing a really good example of that in New York City, and hope to see some in Oregon over the next decade. But even outside of that horizon of trying to alleviate the worst pressures of capitalism on people right now, part of the reason to engage in electoral politics is to build consciousness and build a movement. It's hard to understate how hollowed out American social institutions are. All of us as panelists have spoken about the importance of unions historically. Unions are as weak as they have ever been in the United States, especially in the public sector. Probably even pre-labor law being drafted, unions were stronger than they are right now. And that's a really significant issue. And we do face crises of where American political consciousness is at. That's not the start of the issue, but we do need to recognize that most people are not class conscious. They do not think of themselves as workers first. They do not think of their interests as in alignment with other workers. If we could get that to be the case, we'd be in a lot better situation where the majority of society would understand that we have shared interests around how society is structured. We're very far off from that. We're also very far off from having the organizations to use that consciousness to fight in the first place because of how weak the labor movement is, and of course because we have growing but essentially no presence in the electoral sphere. So without being too much of a downer, I think that it's really important to reckon with how weak the United States left is. Even though we're on an upturn over the past decade and hope to continue that forward, relative to every other country in the world and relative to most of US history, we basically don't have a left, and so our task is to build that up. Many people, including people like young people who consider themselves leftists, don't actually have a solid picture of what that looks like because we grow up where the furthest left option is progressive liberalism, which has some to offer but is really weak insofar as it's a theory to understand how to change the world. To put some more concrete teeth on what I'm saying, it is our task as especially young socialists to rebuild those organizations and to rebuild that consciousness, because we're not going to get anywhere without those two things, and provide real leadership that can raise expectations about what people deserve, about what we have the resources to do, and about what we shouldn't accept, whether it's genocide, paying for healthcare, whatever you want to say, climate collapse. There's a lot of things that we need to shift what people are willing to accept and build the structures and power to do so. I think the best way to do that is through labor organizing, through taking rank and file jobs, advocating for militancy on the shop floor with people that you can build long-term relationships with and make change over time, and less so in statements and kind of high idealism. But another sphere that we can do that and supplement to the labor movement is through the electoral sphere and building a much more fighting force, because we need to be candid that the Democratic Party has not fought for working people for a long time. Insofar as it has, it's compromised itself a ton and honestly has betrayed the working class and its constituents for a very long time, even in recent history, killing both of Bernie Sanders' much more viable campaigns. So when I approach the question with a little bit more skepticism towards electoral politics, it's an important sphere, but the real task is not just turning out to vote or even turning out to canvass, it's building lasting organization and institutions, like David said, so that things like the 2020 uprisings or the 2024 encampment movement aren't just flashes in the pan that shift consciousness, but are flashes in the pan that build power and change how things work overall. So I've yapped enough, that's my basic approach.
Well, I'm a whole lot more optimistic.
I'm optimistic too.
Just had to balance it out.
I think we're well on our way to being an established party. As far as being an established party in the system, we simply have to change the system. My recommendation is that we start by pushing for a switch to approval voting instead of first past the post. We can put the work in to do that. We've seen other ballot measures to change the way that we vote. That's totally something that we can organize and do, and that will open it up to more than just the two parties. In the meantime, I'm running in a Democrat primary, loudly against the establishment, and the rules that they claim I am breaking are made up gatekeeping. They want me to start at the very bottom rung at whatever level they decide is good enough, like a budget committee, and then slowly inch my way up as the party deems acceptable until finally someone retires and I can run unopposed in a race because they hate democracy. The only real rules are that you be a registered voter and you live in your district and you pay the state their $25 filing fee. And that last one is optional. You could collect like 200 signatures instead. We should be running socialists in every single race. We should be contesting every race. The number of races, especially out here, that go uncontested or even empty. Like last year I got my ballot and there were empty options. That should not happen. We should have socialists running in every single race. And I also agree that we should be marrying those labor and electoral efforts. And yeah, the canvassing thing, I know, but it's so true. It's like the best thing we can do. It's doors and dollars that win races, and honestly, a lot of them, I think the doors matter more. Like, my opponent can raise all the money she wants, but if she still sucks, and I go knock doors and talk to people, I get those votes. So, I'm pretty optimistic. I think we're doing good. I think we could always do better, but there's a lot that we can actually like get out and go do and not just hope for. But I think we're doing pretty good.
Thank you so much, all of you, for answering that question. Our second and last prepared question before we get into live Q&A is, what are some of the blind spots you see in socialist organizing that need to be addressed to bring more people into the movement?
We'll do it reverse.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
You go first.
Oh, it needs to be turned on. I'm sorry.
I think we need to be meeting people where they are, and that does not mean that we compromise our values. It just means that we maintain flexibility to shift the focus in our conversations that we're having with people. There are people out there that are still uncomfortable with the word socialist. It is still kind of taboo and scary to certain people. But maybe they're on board with universal health care, just don't call it socialized medicine. And we can focus on that commonality and use that to bridge to other topics where they might unknowingly share socialist values and socialist ideas. And I've kind of done this with my mom, so I know it works. It needs to happen on such a personal level. The organizing is so small. And I think if we're just having kind of a more open conversation, not doing quite so much of a purity test, because that's a trap that we fall into. And it's weird because I never see the right falling into that like infighting. I mean, it's literally called leftist infighting, but I don't ever see MAGA people arguing about the right way to support ICE. They don't do that. But we will argue with each other about the right way to protest ICE. Like, that wasn't peaceful enough, you were too loud. It's really messed up that we do that to each other. So I think we need to coalesce a little bit better and just try to meet some of these people where they are so that we can kind of bring them in at their own speed.
That's good, thank you.
Yeah, I touched a little bit on this last question. To me, the biggest blind spot or maybe like limitation is just where we're at right now relative to where we need to be. We are facing down the most powerful forces that have existed in the history of the planet in centralized government and in corporations who are killing the planet. And we've got a long way to go because we have DSA, which is great. It's got 100,000 members, which is a really big milestone. It's the largest socialist party in the United States in a century. And still that 100,000 is, one, not all active, and two, a fraction of the politics of the millions that we do need to be orienting towards. We need to keep in mind that socialism is a politic of majorities inherently. The idea that the working class is the permanent majority in society, that working people should dictate how their lives and how their society is run, and that to achieve true democratic principles electorally or more broadly requires economic socialism. It requires economic democracy, which is socialism. So that's one really big issue. Growing up as kind of like a youth organizer, I think one really thing that I see that's common in young people is mistaking kind of activism or mobilizing for organizing. So we need to be really clear in our terms and clear in what we're trying to accomplish. Meaning organizing is bringing new people in. It's moving people towards your politics. It's building lasting institutions. And that's different both in skill set and in what kind of actions and orientation you have more broadly than stuff like turning people out to a protest, or even like a minority like direct action, stuff that we really like to see on the left. It's not the same as organizing, and we need to be constantly keeping in mind that our politics are about masses of people, and that we need to build masses of people into our politics and how we orient. Connected to that, one really big crisis that we deal with is that the socialist movement is really separated from the people that it needs to be connected to. All of us up here are at least mostly college educated, and that's not true for much of the working class, and the kind of like academic sectioning off of socialism has been a really, really big issue for the left in the United States post-war. So we need to build connections with working class people of color, and make sure that our politics aren't an educated middle class politics, that they're rooted in working people. And part of that is rebuilding the labor movement, making sure that the labor movement is strong and that it fights for people and it fights for broader issues, and that isn't this kind of milquetoast mediation between labor and capital that exists right now. I think that those are the biggest barriers. There's obviously long-term barriers too. The question of how much can we reform an existing system while trying to really transform what society looks like. Question of climate, and like questions that are really urgent but are out of our hands right now power-wise. Those are all things that we need good answers to, but it's rooted first for me in orienting towards organizing, bringing new people in, building organization, and building a fight.
I think we, as a socialist movement or socialist organizers actually do have a blind spot with the labor movement a lot of the time. I think we're kind of heavy on this panel with a big focus on labor, and especially like at the University of Oregon, because there is a student worker union that is of forefront of people's minds. But I do think that, especially in socialists detached from like Democratic Socialists of America, do have a blind spot and are detached, like from what Noah just said, from the labor movement. I think a lot of that is because we need to build trust with people as socialists. Like, people do not trust socialism right now, and we can't ignore that, especially in our, everything is against us in a lot of ways. And a lot of that, I mean, really, like socialists, we need to like get a job and work with people and build trust with our coworkers and bring them into the movement. After college, I went and worked. I got a job at a grocery store chain, New Seasons Market, and we organized my store into joining the union that was forming and starting to form there. And I know a lot of my coworkers there definitely are not socialists, definitely would not really know what that means. But they learned that I was trustworthy. I followed through. I helped make sure that we got a union. They know that I'm not sure if they always knew I was a socialist, but they knew my politics. And a lot of them expressed at work socialist ideas. Like it is going, as momentum increases, right, it's gonna get easier, but we really have to build trust as the working class and get a job and work with people, and rebuild the labor movement. I think the other piece is that we need to make sure that we're building an organization that lasts and bringing people into that too, not one-off things. And I think the other panelists have talked about that too. But I think here as DSA and YDSA, we see the value in building an organization. I don't think that's true with other socialists or leftists kind of detached from that. I think we I'll go off and I'll create this new group and we'll fight for just this, and then that group goes away. And we've lost a lot of those organizers, or they get burnt out, or they don't win, or they feel hopeless. I think we need to make sure that we're also building a lasting organization, that as we build people up from the working class to also be socialist organizers, that there's places that they can continue to develop as socialists.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that has just been said. Don't go to grad school and get a job. If you are a young person who wants to change the world, those are my two pieces of advice for you. We can't rebuild the labor movement. We can't reorganize the working class from outside of it. The very best thing we can do is to be on the shop floor, building our unions, organizing unions where they don't currently exist. I want to point to one other possible blind spot, though, that I think is very important to note, and that is the question of internationalism. So we, as people in the United States, have a special obligation to build bonds of solidarity that cross borders, and that cross artificial divisions of language and nationality. I think especially here in the US, we have an obligation to build connections across the Western Hemisphere. I would love to see, by the time, I am an old socialist, but by the time I pass away, I would love to see a movement that is hemispheric in orientation and identity, that is American in the true sense of the word, not just United States American, but truly across the whole hemisphere. Many more socialists need to learn other languages, especially Spanish. We need to have real connections with people who are organizing in other countries. We need to travel frequently. There are all sorts of conferences around the world. This is true of socialists, it's true of the student movement more broadly. Like those of us in the room who are really involved in ASUO, like, you should think of yourself as part of a global student movement, and you should be aware that there are, student government structures and projects that are very advanced and sophisticated in other parts of the world, like in Brazil or in Mexico, and they have a lot to teach us. So, there's no reason in the world why we should just remain here in Oregon or just remain in the United States. We should travel, we should learn, we should study, and we also have things sometimes to teach others in the world. They want to learn with us, they want to have those connections. They would also like us to do something about our government and to dismantle the empire, because we have the best position to defeat it. The US empire will be defeated in the field militarily in part, but it's not really going to be ended until we end it with democracy, with political power here in the metropole, here in the United States. So that is a fundamental dimension of our outlook, and we can't forget it even for a second.
Okay, awesome. Well, we're going to get into our live Q&A from the audience. I'm going to do a time check really quickly. Perfect. We are going to take a couple of questions, so just raise your hand if you have one. Let us know which panelists you'd like to address your question to. If it's all of them, you can say it's for all, or any of them.
Hi everyone, thank you for being here. Thank you for all your work. We've been comrades, colleagues, friends for a long time now, so it's been my honor to also learn so much from all of you. Being brief is not my strong suit, but I will do my best. Just because I want to just do a very brief terrain from where I'm coming from, so it's not misleading, right? I believe in no purity, that is a mistake, that is bullshit. Also, avoiding purity also doesn't mean we have to relinquish any of our values, any of the things we're fighting for, and we need to win. Okay, so I'm coming from there. But something that I have, not only intellectually, not only theoretically, but actually practically, when I've been knocking doors, when I've been talking to people in multiple capacities, there is one question there's one, let's say, group or one issue that becomes really difficult to deal with, which is settler colonialism. And I mean that seriously in the sense that we are all workers, but we're most of us, I would say, probably all of us, the majority of us, settlers as well. Okay? We are on stolen land. Okay? Factories are on stolen land. And our workplaces are on stolen land. Our parties, if they have offices, will be on stolen land, okay? And I don't want to say this again to say, oh, therefore we don't build anything. Obviously not. Okay? But I also want to take that demand seriously, because I feel that how we have, right, is always justice deferred. And it's like, okay, when we win, we'll deal with it. And there's a sense in which dealing with the fact of settler colonialism becomes super complex. And hard when we're also trying to fight happen, right? And we're building something almost from the ground up, right? And so I'm wondering, right, if you have had this experience, right? Or how can we also, without diminishing what we're doing, right? How can we act and actually exemplify in our organizing, in our canvassing, in our care for one another, also a kind of decolonial mindset, right? That is not deferred, that is also central. Because I feel like some demands have been very strongly incorporated to this struggle, right? Like a trans demand, which is absolutely key, right? Gender demands, racial demands. And sometimes, right, the demands of indigenous people get flushed out, right? Or get pushed, or tomorrow, right? Or are uncomfortable in a different way, especially for us also as working people. So I'm wondering if you face this, if there's any of this that makes any sense. But comrades, thank you for being here. I really value you. And thank you, Kai, for running. We're also been helping Jen Smith, who's also an ally of us in fighting to get Ward 3, the Eugene Ward 3. We're trying to get her elected. Well, all
addressed to God.
Just what?
To the
So-
panel.
Yes, Jen, whoever wants to, and you can say that is too much, let's move on.
Give me that. Thanks.
Just switch it on.
It's
I want to make sure. Oh, on. Stop turning it off. Okay, I want to make sure that I have the question right. What I have here is how can we exemplify a non-deferred anti-colonial mindset?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know.
Yeah.
I work with tribes in my professional capacity. I worked a job where Costco was knowingly putting a gas station on a burial ground. And it's private land, so they're allowed to do that. And my job was to stand next to tribe members and sift through all of the dirt and pull out the bone shards so that we could put them in a bag and repatriate them. And to add insult to injury, this tribe kept failing to receive federal acknowledgement. They're not federally recognized as a tribe, so they have even fewer rights. But I would never sit here in all of my whiteness and say that I know the right thing to do for the people whose land this was. My goal getting into this office is going to be much better at two-way communication. I would not sit here and claim to know what the best route is, and I certainly wouldn't make a suggestion without input from the affected tribes. That's my plan.
Yeah, this is a really tough question, especially on the deferral part. Like openly, not the perspective of socialists more broadly, but I have a lot of pessimism towards our ability to tackle a number of issues under capitalism as it exists. Chief amongst those is climate and indigenous sovereignty. But I think that we should be open at acknowledging that like, hey, there are a lot of issues tied particularly with private land ownership and state sovereignty in general that can't be untangled until we have enough power to push towards a broader rupture. And I don't think that we should pretend that that's not the case, that we can address issues like indigenous sovereignty or even broader issues like racism without first dismantling capitalism and class society. So I think that that's something that's important to get out there and not pretend that we can do it all. That being said, I think that a lot of what Ella talked about earlier about like building trust, building relationships, I'd say building solidarity between existing movements is really, really important because socialism and even broader left politics are about universalism, about fighting for everyone and about fighting for justice. And when we section off from each other, we really lose basically the core of our power, which is the ability to mobilize millions of people. So I think incorporating that as much into our work right now is the best thing that we can do to position ourselves to have the right relationships to be able to deliver a better answer, hopefully once we do achieve rupture. And that is work that a lot of socialists are doing. Portland DSA has a lot of projects in collaborating with local tribes, and I encourage that to expand wherever possible. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I would just add that I do struggle a little bit with the idea of like a decolonial mindset. I don't think in a lot of ways that that's necessarily possible or what we should be, that should be the goal for especially people that here are, you know, ancestors of settlers. And I do think it is more like what are we tangibly doing to like build trust with communities of indigenous people that are like here in Oregon. I think what Noah just talked about is like continuously showing up as like socialists, as people that they can trust, that follow through on what they promise, is a first step. And I don't necessarily think that's like deferring it, but like doing small things like I have a friend that has volunteered to drive water to Warm Springs. And I think DSA could rent a giant truck and try to deliver it all this water at once, and then never come back again. And we wouldn't have this relationship component that's being built, as well as we wouldn't be building organizers and connections with lots of people in the socialist movement. And it's just, we don't have the money to do that too, as like an organization. And so small things like that, I mean, I do hope that it is helping. And I know it is, because they need water, and it's only like 10 families are getting more water because of this, but it's something. And I do think that it is something we need to talk about openly as socialists, is how to address that we don't have all the answers.
Yeah. Just briefly, thanks for this question, Comrade. So I do want to say that I'm pretty skeptical of attitudes that say we need to like decolonize a particular space or work on someone's consciousness, or primarily focusing on one's subjectivity. I don't think that's what you're saying. Really, the overall emphasis of our movement needs to be on changing objective power relations in society, especially through political power. If we want to change the situation being faced by people on reservations in this state, the best way we can do that is to win state power and change those relations. That's much more effective than organizing mutual aid, as honorable as that is. Also, in general, it's just really important to keep in mind that we are working with flawed, damaged human material here. We're talking about a massive group of society. We're talking about workers, people who are affected by all of the racism and the sexism and just the muck of ages, as Marx once said. It sits in our consciousness, and it sits, in places of our minds that we can't reach. It doesn't mean that we accept it, or that we don't stop working to challenge those beliefs, or that we ever tolerate bigotry in our organizations. But it does mean that we need to be able to have an orientation towards pulling people in and challenging it within from a place of solidarity, right? One other point is just thinking about the future, thinking about where politics is going over the rest of this century. We're thinking about climate change, we're thinking about the green transition. These are issues that will really affect people who are place-based. A lot of indigenous communities and nations, for example, in South America, sit on lithium fields, right? So in the global north, in the United States, we as a movement need to have an orientation that says, okay, we need to reduce material throughput and energy usage here in the US to actually remove some of that, real pressure that communities around the world who are experiencing environmental justice, that they're going to be faced with increasingly as the century goes on. So that's just one concrete area to think about.
I have a question for David. A concept that I had not learned until very, very recently, minutes ago, was internationalism. Mm-hmm. What exactly is that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, internationalism it's a pretty simple idea. It's the idea that we as human beings all around the world, regardless of culture or language, or just where on earth we live, we share certain common things. We share certain material interests. We want to live more free lives. We want to be able to live in dignity and to flourish and to raise families and to pursue higher interests that we may have as people. And yet we are told constantly that there is something essential that separates us from them, people who live on the other side of that artificial border that was created, people who speak a language that we can't understand. People in China can never understand people in the United States. People in the United States can never understand people in Africa, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of overlap with just the idea of being anti-racist, right? But internationalism, I think, goes even one step further, and it seeks to sort of transcend the whole basis for these artificial divisions of humankind. Socialism has always been an internationalist doctrine. In part, that's because capitalism is a global system. Capitalists organize across borders. It's much easier for them to do so, and much of their profits come from transnational flows of money. So we need to be organizing as a labor movement across borders effectively too. We're not going to be able to defeat American capital if we are not simultaneously organizing workers in Mexico or organizing workers in Southeast Asia. And when we fail to do that, we set the stage for war. We set the stage for xenophobia and cultures of exclusion and racism that separate the working class and sabotage our ability to gain power. And unfortunately, nationalism, racism, xenophobia have been very strong, even on the history of the left. So we have a bedrock, there's a bedrock necessity for us to always be striving for internationalism. Yeah.
All right, this is really very, very inspiring and educational for me. Thank you all. My name is Michael Bradley. I'm a professor here at UO, Sociology Department, and just want to appreciate what you're doing on all the activist levels, organizing levels, and educational levels, making this kind of forum possible, working within student government, making this conversation possible on campus. I wanted to kind of pose a question about the larger story of socialism and what it means and where that fits in the strategy that you're all thinking about in terms of local activism here in Oregon to advance socialist principles, visions, inspire engagement, and so on. And it's the history of actually existing socialism. The little s socialisms that are all around us, that are all around this society, incomplete, imperfect, but there, that make lives better. And not just here in the United States, but around the world. And those stories and how they can inspire action beyond what people are boxed into. Because when I think about, I talked to a liberal ally, friend, neighbor, they don't see the link between the socialists, the collectivist principles that come out of socialist, communist, progressive reformers over the centuries. They don't see that as the same thing as maybe we ought to be supporting an insurgent candidate on the Democratic left instead of the mainstay. So how does telling the story of socialism in its positive and inspiring way factor into the strategy on the ground today for you? Because it's so easy for us on the left to get into the critique, into the embattled position of being marginalized from the establishment. I think it's important to have that part of the story in the strategy and strategic development of a movement. So I'll put that out there, and with much appreciation. Anybody who wants to, one question, one response is fine too.
That's a lot to digest. I really like that question. I think that part of a nugget there is why use the socialist label at all? We have so much baggage in the United States. Why don't we just repackage our ideas, same concept, but use different language and avoid all of that? And I think it is because there's so much value in that history. We aren't fully taught that history. It's our job as socialists to educate about it. But I think particularly now, during a time that some people call late stage capitalism, which I sure hope it's late stage, but it's a developed capitalism that has really done a sophisticated job, even more using modern technology to hollow out aspects of life, like I've talked about before. And that leaves people, like liberals, maybe like your friend, questioning, like, how did we get here? What can we do to get out of it? And I think that socialism, more than any other ideology, paints a clear picture on both of those questions. How did we get here? Well, there's a sophisticated political economy where the incentives in society lead the people in power to make decisions that hurt the vast majority of people, of working people. And Marxism and socialism more broadly has not just spoken to that, but assessed it as it's occurred over the development of industrialism and global capitalism. So we have that historical record. We can say, like, hey, we called it. We knew that Trump was going to go to war in the Middle East and in Venezuela and that kind of thing. And also that there's a path out of it. Hey, a lot of what we appreciate about modern society, whether that's labor law or like kind of basic protections, in various industries. A lot of that traces back to socialists and fighting. And particularly if you're looking, hey, when did things start to get really bad in society? It's when the socialists got purged and neoliberalism took over. So I think speaking to that history and that kind of direct experience that people have goes a long way in reinforcing the fact that, like, hey, we are putting forward a vision for a better world, and this isn't just something that some guy thought up on the internet. There's like a real history of movements here with proven successes, with proven failures to learn from. And that's why it's important to hold on to that label, is because I don't think that fight is over.
I would just add, I think it's really important that socialists are hopeful, like we bring hope. And I think that's something different that we do as organizers, and especially as like union organizers, or like I'm now currently a union staffer. Like if I'm not bringing hope to members that they can actually change their current conditions, what am I doing? So I think that is something that telling the story of like successes, and maybe that's not always history, but like talking about what we're doing that's working, what's winning, and being hopeful, it is important.
Yeah. I think in the modern context, like, showing is better than telling, which is why it's good to fight and elect people like Zoran that can pass policies that change people's lives, because it goes a lot further, but it's a lot harder of a fight.
Yeah.
I just want to say I really like this idea of communicating through storytelling, because I think it's far easier to listen to and to process when it's in the form of a story. And this idea that little s socialism makes lives better, and we can explain that to people by, telling stories about how we used to have this thing called a pension that was standard with your job, and how that was a good thing. The history, telling the stories is how we can help explain to the liberals that the socialism is not a scary thing, and by the way, it's also why you're able to have, a fire department.
Yeah, Michael, thanks for this question. It's good to see you. Michael is my advisor. He's really great to see you. I would say that, as socialists, what we want most of all is a world without oppression. And the name, the label is secondary. It maybe someday will be called something different. If God offered me a trade and said, I could give you what you want, like I could give you all the things that you associate with socialism today, but you have to lose the entire tradition, and no one remembers anything about it. No one remembers the name of Karl Marx or anything like that, or any of these other people who fought for a better world. I would still take that trade, right? But that's not how history works. I think that the tradition is beautiful, and there is so much inspiration and spirit that I take from it. It's one of the reasons why I've kept doing this for a long time now, and I just keep discovering more of the beauty and the power and the tragedy also. There's a great, if you are into tragedy, the left there's a lot of it there, but it gives you this sense of meaning that is much more grand, I think, than just the stories that the Democratic Party tells us, or even the stories that kind of more just America-focused liberals and progressives who just care about the tradition of the United States and who are oblivious to the histories of struggle in Europe, in Asia, in Africa, and Latin America. Once you start to identify with all of that around the world, really, your life starts to have this greater meaning. That doesn't mean that you get your ego inflated, you start thinking of yourself as this world historic person, but you are attached to something that is world historic. And that, I think, is just, I wouldn't trade that for anything in the world.
Except for socialism.
Except for socialism, yeah. Yeah.
May I take two more questions? I see you right here.
Hey, so one of my biggest concerns about capitalism and fascism as it exists right now is the uptake of artificial intelligence and other technologies that, as it relates to the labor marketplace, of increasing worker demands while, not increasing incentives or getting rid of workers completely to use AI, how it connects to environmental impacts, how it connects to community aspects of people using social media or artificial intelligence as a way to offload community and all those things. So I see artificial intelligence and these other technologies as kind of an existential threat to socialism to some degree. So I'm curious how the introduction of these AI systems, the popularization of them, and the way that it's continuing to prop up the United States economy supposedly, while also increasing wealth transfer to the top, 0.001%. I'm curious about how your strategy, or you think the social strategy, needs to shift in relation to artificial intelligence, and how we need to kind of take up the fight against that as socialists, how it changes the dynamics there.
Yeah, the AI question. I think that the jury is still kind of out, in that it could go in different ways, a lot of different ways that are more dystopian and maybe also more utopian, or maybe a combination of both. One basic thing to say is that socialism's agent of change, the working class, does not mean people who currently have jobs or people who are in unions, right? It's people who need to work, or people who are separated from what it is that they need to live. That's the broad definition of the proletariat. So in a scenario where AI does lead to major structural changes in employment, and maybe lots and lots of people being laid off or fired, that doesn't mean that the basis for social struggle changes, per se. The organizational forms, the tactics, the strategies, those might change, but we shouldn't. If that happens, if that transpires, it doesn't mean the game is over. No, the game is over as long as we're still human, and that we still have the capacity to think and resist. I personally think that some of the discourse around AI is a bit too doomer and a bit too pessimistic. It is a very powerful technology. It's in the hands of very dangerous, nasty people in Silicon Valley and increasingly in governments, and we don't want it to be in the hands of Elon Musk. We don't want it to be in the hands of OpenAI or in Donald Trump. But the technology itself could be put to powerful uses. Socialists, we want more productivity. We do want more democracy and control at work, but what we're really fighting for, I think, is to be at work less, to have to work less hours and to have more time available to exist as human beings, and also to engage in political struggle outside of the workplace. So if AI can be channeled in such a way that it reduces work hours without a cut in pay, right, without separating us from the things that we need to live, then it could actually be something that really enhances human freedom. And I think that that's what we need to be fighting for, because the people who currently control it will not deploy it that way. They're only going to deploy it that way if we fight to make that happen. So that's my general take. We're not Luddites. We fight for more productivity. We fight for more control, and we shouldn't have a uniformly negative attitude towards the technology itself.
Yeah, similar tradition to David. I would say that it feels different living in it, we are living during a form of industrial revolution, or technological revolution rather. But this is far from the first time that capitalism has invented and rolled out technology that puts a lot of people out of work, that really changes the flow of production. And every time we've seen that historically, it doesn't lead to less people working. It does in the short term, but in the long term, the working class stays the majority of society. What work they do might differ. And again, while the jury's still out, I'm much more inclined to believe that that's the case that we're looking at here, that we're looking at something closer to a second computer revolution. Computers massively changed what technology and work looked like across the world, but it didn't change class structure. It didn't change political structure in that same way. The overarching structure is still capitalism. And so I think until a rupture from that mode of production happens, that we're just going to experience, potentially long-term, potentially significant negative effects. But I think that the kind of idea that we're going to get rid of people working, that robots are going to be able to run society for us, is not actually in the cards, and is often the overpromising of investors, which we should be very skeptical of. And even if that's the case, that is a real threat to capitalism that could cause the system's collapse or change. And if we're in those conditions, we want to be thinking, well, how can we come out of massive transformation in a more positive way, and be a little bit less skeptical of like the initial rollout. The other part of your question that I think is really interesting and that I'm a lot more like personally concerned about is social media and like broadly how people are engaged with. If you look historically, people in these mass movements, whether it's a strong labor movement, civil rights movement, whatever it is, once they got off work, a lot of what they did to entertain themselves and each other was social and was with each other. We see so much less engagement now, and we are engaging in systems that are designed to hold our attention, engage us, and make us have fun. I have a lot more fun scrolling social media and playing video games than I do doing a lot of the organizing work that I do. Like, I'll be candid about it. I think we should be open that like political work is really satisfying and important, but it's not more fun than the thing that is designed to be as fun as possible. So we need to kind of address that, and I think that's a really open question, and I think a lot of that is how we engage with each other, encourage each other to be a little bit more human, and don't give in to those parts of modern society.
We're gonna take our last question. I want to talk about AI. I mean, yeah, sure. Stop turning it off.
I didn't turn it on.
Okay, first, I've been watching this stupid captions the whole time, which I'm pretty sure are AI, and they're absolute garbage. So I'm.
The louder you talk, the better they are, because they're coming out of here.
Oh.
I did want to touch on the thing that you said about offloading community, and it's the biggest concern that I have with AI in general is this habit that some people are developing of offloading any kind of thinking on AI. And I think that, we cannot fight against AI. It's here, it's staying, that's fine. We need to fight for healthy use of it, and we need to embrace it and wrangle it and make it work for us, use it to organize. So much of what we do is social, it has to be, and we're here talking about trying to merge the labor movement and the electoral movement, and that is inherently social. So I don't know, I don't have any advice. Just, keep being social with real people, for the love of God.
Please.
Hi, Brady. My name's Matthew, and nice to meet you all for the first time.
I'm Matthew.
So I got a two-parter question, but so brief. Maybe dovetailing off what Professor Dryling. What role does political education play in our movements? I've been in groups where they're mostly book clubs, and then I've been one where it's just action oriented, and then also the political education put out for the words we use, kind of I've been trained, being specific and calling it a capitalist class, but now we're seeing kind of people saying Depstein class, and it's should we just kind of move ride that wave of what using that word, or kind of be stringent? Yeah.
Yeah, so the question is about the rigor and precision of our language and how we use theoretical concepts in different settings. There's no formula to answer this question. It's always a matter of kind of the art of politics, how you communicate. You have an obligation to be able to speak in a language and a vocabulary that people can understand, that working people can understand. Also, though, we're not trying to dumb down our theory of capitalism. We're not trying to distort our strategy. So we need to find, I think, compromise terms based on context. When we're in meetings of close comrades and organizers, We do have an obligation to teach each other and to, I think, engage in study and to learn more about our tradition. We do that as individuals on our own time, but also collectively through readings. That's been a really important part of UOYDSA's approach, is that we're not all just organizing all the time. We actually think that it is important to learn about the tradition and learn about the ideas that underline our approach, and that actually keeps that approach dynamic and not sort of stale or static. But I guess there's no one size fits all answer to that question. Yeah.
For the first part of your question on political education, I think it's especially important that we are kind of building it into everything, building it into our union meetings, building it into talking to our neighbors, building it into day-to-day life, and partly because I don't want us to get detached from what we're doing. So I think it's really easy to get really focused on, and like I've definitely experienced this, get really focused on like winning a union contract. That is the only thing right at the front of mind. And maybe that is like where we're prioritizing our time right at that moment, or whatever tangible kind of reform or we're doing, but also making sure that we're not burning out. And part of that is making sure we're understanding why we're doing what we're doing and building in like why talking to our coworkers all the time is important. It's not just important because we want to win this contract. It's important because we're building towards a better world.
Yeah, I think we maybe downplayed it a little bit, but I think political education is amongst the most important things for socialists and socialist organizations to engage in. The reason it sometimes falls to the background of these sorts of discussion is I think there's a lot more decently well-educated small sects, book clubs, than there are organizations that are doing like really solid organizational work, but are maybe underdeveloped on the theoretical side. But as far as like, especially at the chapter level of engaging young people, political education and organizing should be the two pillars of any youth organization, whether it's explicitly socialist or even organizations that are organizing on other issues. And that needs to be the case because we're trying to build a movement that does mean something. Socialism isn't an abstract term. A lot of people use it nowadays to mean basically when the government does good stuff. I think we should be very cautious about those open-ended definitions. Socialism means a society run by and for the working class. And that's a lot different than the society that we have right now. And it means there's a lot of like delicate moving pieces that go into that. So, and especially when we're engaging in the most important work that I think people could engage in, workplace organizing, part of that is people meeting workers who are not socialists or maybe are underlyingly socialists, and both bringing them into the struggle of union organizing or labor organizing, but also into the socialist struggle. So there's kind of a two-way pipeline of socialists entering the labor movement to build that and meet people and bring people in, and then meeting natural leaders and talented people in the workplace and bringing them into the socialist movement. And that kind of give and take can go a long way. Historically, and even the past decade or two in the United States, we've seen that be a really fruitful approach. So it's really important.
Yeah, I gotta agree, the political education aspect is so important. And especially with some of the community organizing, you have to know how the system is working in order to fight against it and get the thing that you want. I mean, to go back to the flock thing, so there's a contract with the city, how did that get there, and how do we get rid of it? That's like deep, boring political education, but it was really, really crucial to win that battle. And then you also talked about language, and I don't know, language is always an evolving thing. It's a living thing, or at least this one is. You know, we've seen like co-opting of the word progressive lately. I've, in my time, seen the word queer go from being like an unspeakable slur to something embraced by the community. So we're back to, meet people where they are. Maybe socialist is scary, but social democracy is okay. But yeah, just, be flexible, work with it. It's okay. We don't have to get like super nitty gritty and fight about word definitions. It's okay.
Thank you. Daphne's going to close us out with some future events, but one more clap for our
Hey, hi everybody. My name's Daphne Patrick. If we haven't met, I'm our chief of staff at ASUO. Just thank you, panelists. Thank you, David, Ella, Noah, Kai. This was really great. Thanks for sticking around. If you're still here, obviously. I would like to invite you to the rest of the events in the series. There's a couple really cool things coming up. Obviously, this is the Socialist Speaker Series. This is event 1. Quickly, I'm going to walk us through what we have left. The first thing we have coming up is in a couple of weeks. It's on the weekend of May 15th and 16th. ASUO is collaborating with YDSA to put on another Future of Work conference. What this is going to look like is it's going to look like a Friday night kickoff with Joy James. We've invited her to come speak again at campus, which we're really honored to have her again. So that's going to be Friday, May 15th. There's going to be a dinner. It's going to be beautiful, and that's to kick off the conference, which is happening the next day, Saturday the 16th. If you're at all interested in coming to a conference where we're going to talk about technology advancements, we're going to talk about why unions, we're going to talk about what it looks like to organize as a student worker, how that looks when you're transitioning out of student employment and into real life adult employment, as they say. We're going to do some workshops, and then we're going to do a job fair. Like I said, in collaboration with YDSA, we're really excited. So if you're at all interested in that, I invite you to scan this QR code. It's just an interest form, just to send you some more information in your email. So please do that if that sounds fun to you. And then the following week, after the conference, this is week 8 of the term, by the way, Friday, May 22nd, we are bringing Rhiannon Hamon to campus. We're really very excited to have her. She's extremely accomplished. She's a Palestinian American supervising attorney at the University of Texas School of Law, and she'll be wrapping up this series. But yeah, I'm thrilled about this. It was so great to see all of you. Thank you again for your time. It was really, really great to learn, and we would love to invite you to keep learning with us. So yeah, that's all for me. Thank you for coming.
Whatever you guys want to do, we all carpool together. So they're saying we should go over to the Kremlin and stuff.
Can you guys hear me? Can you hear the phone?
Goodbye, our friends on Zoom. Thanks for coming. Bye, Zoom friends.
Bye, Ian.
Bye.
Bye, Ian.
Oh, they're saying bye.